There are nearly 500,000 elected offices in America, and LGBTQ plus people hold fewer than 1,000 of them. That's not just a statistic. It means fewer lawmakers championing legislation that protects our community. It means fewer visible role models for LGBTQ plus youth who desperately need to see themselves in power. And it means the decisions that affect our lives get made by people who've never had to live them. The candidates most qualified to change that are often the ones who can't outspend or outconnect their way into visibility. I'm Sean Quintero, a bisexual podcaster who built Proud to Lead because those leaders deserve to be heard. Today's guest is Maebe Pudlow, otherwise known as Maebe A Girl, a drag artist, activist, and openly trans elected official running for California State Senate in District 26. In this interview, we get into housing affordability, corporate influence in democratic politics, trans visibility in government, and why grassroots progressive movements are challenging the political establishment from the ground up. We also talk about ICE raids in Los Angeles, economic inequality, policing, and what it means to fight for working class communities while refusing corporate PAC money, all through the lens of someone trying to become the first openly trans person elected to California state legislator. If this conversation is interesting to you, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. This is Proud to Lead. I'm going to dive right in. California has never had a trans or non-binary person serve in the state legislature. Only two U.S. states, which was really shocking to me, Delaware and Virginia, have had transgender people serve in the upper chambers of their state legislators. And in the entire country, only 26 openly transgender, queer, or non-binary lawmakers are currently serving at a statewide level. You are the first drag queen to ever win an elected office. And there have been questions around electability or viability as a candidate. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, because you've faced institutional pushback, you've faced party pushback. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because viability is a question a topic that keeps coming up over and over, and it kind of makes you wonder what exactly are they alluding to? Are they suggesting that somebody is not electable because they're a queer person, because they're a trans person, because they are a drag performer? And if you've ever met a drag performer, you'll probably know that they are some of the most politically and socially active members of society, constantly doing charity work, constantly showing up for the community. And this is something that I'm a part of as well. And I'm super excited to be running to try to become the first openly trans elected official at the state level here in California. And, I think also when it comes to viability, I think that progressives in general sometimes face this issue because they are not raising the kinds of corporate cash that many traditional establishment Democrats are raising. I'm actually very, very proud of our fundraising. While I have not raised nearly as much as my corporate opponents, we've raised over $53,000. And here's the thing, we actually have over 2,000 individual contributions. So while some of my opponents might be stacking up these $5,000 donations from corporate PACs, and actually even more than 5,000, you can go upwards of 12,000 here at the state level in California. The average donation for my campaign is around $23. And that's because I'm being supported by the very people who I'm going to be elected by to represent.
I'm curious because that's a pretty big commitment to say I'm not. You made commitments to not take any PAC money, any corporate cash. How does that? What are you trying to communicate with that level of commitment?
On the most obvious level, I want to communicate to the voters that I'm here to represent the people. I'm not here to represent corporate interests. I'm not even here to represent party interests. I am running as a Democrat, but there are a lot of issues that I have with the Democratic Party, especially the establishment, corporate, moderate Democrats. And unfortunately, you get a lot of pushback whenever you do any sort of call outs or call ins within a political party. So for me, the most important thing is communicating to my voters that I'm here to represent the people first and foremost.
Yeah, I've seen this pushback, and we see it in the headlines a lot, right? You have the AOC, Bernie Sanders, Zoran Mamdani, and then you have the Sheryl Sandbergs, some of the more centrists that have been elected recently. How are you kind of maybe, because you mentioned like calling in, how are you bridging those divides where uh, the number one issue right now is affordability across the board, like nationally,
Absolutely.
state level, regionally, affordability. How are you bridging that gap? Because when you do get elected, you're one of 40 at the state level. And so how are
Yeah.
you bridging those relationships where there are centrists and there are progressives and there are leftists and liberals in all of California?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do believe in coalition building. I recognize that progressives and leftists are not able to get these things done on their own. So for me, it's a lot about the messaging in terms of a lot of my policies. All of my policies are based around populism and these ideas that are going to benefit everybody, not just progressives, not just leftists. They're going to actually bridge the class divides, and that's something that we don't really often see in politics. Is a discussion around class. And my entire platform is built on human rights, social justice, and economic equity. And when I say economic equity, what I mean is universal health care, housing for all, free state college. And these are concepts, these are policies that are going to benefit everybody, not just a select few. So for me, it is really about being able to have civil conversations with people that you disagree with. As I mentioned, I'm not anywhere close to being a centrist or a moderate, but I have to engage with centrists and moderates all the time, even in my position as a board member for the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council. Just as an example, we had our monthly 3-hour meeting last night, and while our board is, there's 21 members of the board. While most of us are Democrats, it is kind of a mix of Democrats that are a little bit more in the center and a little bit more to the left. We had a particular item on our agenda last night that was put forth by one of our members, and the motion was to basically ask for more LAPD presence, more police presence in our neighborhood, based on this idea of an uptick of sexual assault, rape, vandalism, littering. And I really had to chime in and say, I cannot support this motion for a number of reasons. Firstly, cops don't necessarily prevent crime. Uh, they are there to respond after something has already happened. Um, but also, I was not comfortable doing this without any, proven statistics or facts or data around this idea of an increase in crime. Because in reality, crime is actually down overall in Los Angeles, and so I don't want to perpetuate the myth that crime is up and create this sort of fear factor in our neighborhood when it's not necessarily true. Of course, there's crime in every neighborhood. Anyways, I'm digressing a bit, but I brought up all of these points and I did it in a very diplomatic, civil way where I'm not yelling and screaming at somebody who has an idea that is different from me. And ultimately, I was able to persuade my board to vote down this particular motion. And that was something that I was really proud of because when I brought it up, I wasn't necessarily sure how people were going to respond to what I was saying.
Mm.
Especially because the motion was brought forth by one of our co-chairs. And again, I just sort of laid it out in a respectful manner. And so to me, that proves that you actually can have, civil conversations and you can bridge these gaps between leftists and centrists slash moderates. For me, what I have found, unfortunately, is that people who are moderate and centrist, and of course, this is a generalization, does not apply to everybody, but I feel like sometimes they're less likely to move left and they are expecting leftists to move right. And that's how I believe we are actually in the situation that we're in right now on the federal level. If you take a look at the National Democratic Party, the policies that the party has promoted over the past 20, 30 years have just slowly but surely moved to the right. The Overton window has been slowly and surely moving to the right. And that's why, 10 years ago, we were talking about trans rights. Now, the Democratic Party, they're afraid to talk about trans rights. They're afraid to talk about ideas like universal health care. But when it comes down to it, the voters, the constituency, the stakeholders, these are actually policies that they want to see. They want to see populist policies. They want to see economic equity policies. They want to see inclusion for everyone.
coming back to the conversation around viability and
Mhm.
electability, what do you think this says about how the Democratic Party views trans visibility? Do because I'm seeing it as well. There's like this hesitancy or cautiousness to even discuss trans rights. It may be like the backlash that they felt like they received from the previous presidential campaign, and so it's almost like they don't know how to talk about these things out of fear of experiencing backlash. What do you think this says about what they view when it comes about how they view trans visibility in the political space?
I think in general, I do think that the federal National Democratic Party, the DNC, I do think is a little bit out of touch with the wants and needs of the people that they represent, people who identify as Democrats or anybody to left of center. And I think it's unfortunate. And I think that's why Democrats lose when they are running on policies that are not popular amongst their voter base. I personally think that it was really disappointing that at the last Democratic National Convention, not a single trans person was invited to speak on stage. And yet they had Republicans on stage. They had cops on stage. And it's like, who are we doing this for? Trans people are voters. Trans people deserve to have all the same protections and dignities as everybody else. And so these shouldn't be unpopular policies. These are actually common sense policies. Let everybody be included.
Hmm. Now, you're obviously a trans person who is running, and you are boots on the ground, having conversations with people. Are you seeing hesitancy or cautiousness from voters?
No, and that's what I find to be particularly fascinating is in my everyday life, in my life as a neighborhood council representative, in my life as somebody running for state senate who is almost every day knocking on doors, talking to voters, talking about the issues. Uh, One of the great things is I've had so many great, wonderful conversations, and the fact that I'm trans happens to be an aside. It doesn't really matter. I Because I'm not asking people to vote for me because I'm a trans person, but I do think that it is important to have trans representation because if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. Trans people are very much on the menu right now, uh, at state levels, at the national level. There's over 700 anti-LGBTQIA bills that have been introduced in 2026 alone, at the federal level, across state levels. When I say anti-LGBTQIA plus, what I actually mean is they're mostly anti-trans bills. And so
Yeah.
when we don't have trans people to be at the table to defend ourselves and say why we deserve a seat at the table, we deserve a seat at the table to make sure that they're not putting forth oppressive legislation to impact our rights and our dignities. Here in California, I think that we often think of California as being this safe haven for queer people, and in many ways it is, especially compared to red states. But at the same time, I don't know if everybody is aware that we've actually had anti-trans legislation introduced at the California state level. And
Mm.
again, when we don't have any trans people to be able to push back on that, I mean, it's a fairness issue first and foremost, but it's just how are we going to ever advance as a community if we don't actually have representation in our actual governments?
Yeah, I think, and what I feel, there's a difference between having people who represent us and people who are us in the room. I mean, we bring a very different lived experience as queer folks. We are inherently and intimately connected to how these bills are going to impact our lives, our families' lives, etc.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's really inspiring to see somebody who is so visible and is, being able to use their position of your personal elected office to speak to issues like policing, housing, etc. I'm curious. You know, you're running for SD 26, which includes Boyle Heights, Koreatown, Chinatown, Lincoln Heights, communities where specifically. It's filled with hardworking, immigrant heavy, renter heavy, people and voters. What are the issues that you're hearing from all of the conversations you're having that's like rising to the top? What are people like voting on? Because it's not whether or not you're trans, it's not whether or not you're queer. Their kitchen table, we hear this all the time. You got to speak to the kitchen table issues. What are those kitchen table issues that you're hearing?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, the big one is affordability, especially here in California. I mean, across the US in general, but especially here in California. California's been expensive for a while, but it has gotten to the point where it is just utterly utterly unaffordable. And
No.
I've had to see so many of my neighbors move out of our neighborhood because they just can't afford to live here anymore. I'm sure you've heard the rent is too damn high, and it just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. Meanwhile, wages remain stagnant. And I think that is a big kitchen table discussion. And so people are either staying put where they're at, or they're forced to move to a more affordable part of the city, which I would challenge you to find a more affordable part of Los Angeles anywhere. And again, this sort of circles back to this idea of corporate greed. And this is why I refuse to take any money from, the apartment association or the real estate corps, just because I'm not here to support those people. I'm here to support the renters who uh, just want to be housed and be safely and comfortably housed and to have that housing security. And I think that's something that we're seeing dramatically increase over just the past decade is housing insecurity. We talk a lot about homelessness in Los Angeles, and we have there's far too many people who are living on the streets or living in their cars or couch surfing. But something we actually don't really talk about enough, and something that is difficult to gauge in terms of quantitative and qualitative data is housing insecurity. And I think that it is a pervasive issue amongst the majority of renters here in Los Angeles. And so
Yeah, so
go ahead. No, I was just going to say, so, this is why I'm fighting for housing for all. I'm not just saying that as an ideal, this like sort of unattainable thing that maybe one day we'll get to. We actually do have the ability and the funding to be able to house every single person in California, regardless of gender identity and regardless of immigration status.
there's a lot of things that you've mentioned, which is housing for all. You've mentioned healthcare for all. And then you've also mentioned like these are not just things that we can do, but things that we deserve. Tell me a little bit more about the kind of theory of governance behind that.
Yeah, well, I'm somebody who believes and knows that healthcare is a human right, housing is a human right. I think that's budgets are moral documents, and the way that we disperse our funds equitably or inequitably amongst our society says a lot about who we are as a society. Um, in my role on the neighborhood council, I've been the treasurer for the past 6 years. And so I know what it takes to be able to balance a budget so that you can actually pour money back into your communities. And the way you do it is by minimizing administrative and bureaucratic costs. It's not by giving all of your money to the police to solve every problem in society, leaving crumbs for every other social safety nets and, different departments, whether it's the city level, county level, state level. Um, and so, one of my least favorite statistics that I like to talk about when I talk about housing is on any given night, there are more than 72,000 people experiencing homelessness in LA County. In LA City, there's more than 43,000 people experiencing homelessness. Yet across LA County, we only have about 16,000 interim housing shelter beds.
Sure.
Meanwhile, there's upwards of 250,000 vacant units. And so when you do the math, it just does not feel morally just to have more empty units in our city and in our county than we have people living on the streets. And something's got to give. We got to figure out how to reconcile that and balance it so that we are moving more people into housing, so that we're ending the cycle of homelessness. And how you do that is by putting people into permanent supportive housing, not just shuffling them through, various shelters and then displacing them to different communities. This is why even sweeps don't work. I know that people don't like the visuals of seeing an encampment, but the reality is those people don't have anywhere else to go. And so you can clear that encampment. All you're going to do is make life more difficult for the people that were living there because they're going to probably lose their important documentation and the very little material belongings that they actually have. And you're not solving any problem because what's going to happen is that same encampment is just going to pop up a few blocks down the road. So the approach has just been these band-aid solutions that are not working whatsoever. And so for me, I know that we can actually house everybody, but it's going to take a couple of different steps to be able to achieve that. Um, Firstly, we have to repeal a couple of longtime laws that are across the states. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ellis Act or the Costa-Hawkins Acts, but those
Yeah, break
basically,
those
yeah,
down for us.
yeah. So basically, these are laws that were established decades ago, which unfortunately allow landlords to mass evict tenants, especially for the intent of removing their property from the markets. But what they actually end up doing is they end up just totally renovating the building and jacking up the rents by 2 or 3 times. And so you're displacing the people that were formerly existing there, and you're changing the character of the neighborhood through gentrification. Um, and so what we need to do is we need to repeal those acts, but we also need to institute stronger eviction protections. We need to institute stronger renter rights overall. And then just in terms of affordability of rent, I believe that we also need to do a statewide rental freeze until minimum wages match the livable wage by county. We're still having this conversation about a nationwide $15 minimum wage. $15 is not going to get you housing, I don't think,
Yeah.
anywhere in the US. And we're still at what, 725 for the federal minimum wage. Here in California, it is higher, but it's still not a livable wage. Livable wage in Los Angeles County is it has to be at least $25 to be able to
Mm.
comfortably afford your rent, afford your groceries, your health insurance, and all of these other bills that we all have to pay to stay healthy, housed, and a part of society. We also need to institute a vacancy tax. I think this is something that a lot of people want, and for some reason, our politicians are just not moving forward on. A vacancy tax would essentially, and I want to clarify when I talk about a vacancy tax, this is not for small mom and pop landlords that have, 6, 8 units. I'm talking about these big corporate developments that you're seeing pop up all over the city. I'm seeing them pop up here in my own neighborhood. And they end up building these massive housing complexes, and then there's just these empty units because people can't afford them. So I propose that we institute a vacancy tax where if a unit sits vacant for more than 3 months, a vacancy tax pops in unless the landlord agrees to reduce the commercial or residential rents. So if you don't reduce the rents, then the vacancy tax continues on until that unit is filled. The money then could be used to build permanent supportive housing. And that's the key factor is we have to build more housing. As I mentioned earlier, there just are not enough interim housing shelter beds, and there certainly are not enough units of permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness, people who are low income, people who are housing insecure. I believe that we need to build 100,000 units, at least 100,000 units of permanent supportive housing in LA County, and at least 100,000 units of permanent supportive housing across the rest of California. And that's how you solve homelessness. But
Mm.
it does require big investments. But I think this is something that everybody wants. And when I say this, what I mean is ending homelessness. If you were to ask any Angelino, they would probably say that's one of the biggest, if not the biggest issue, citywide is homelessness is on the rise. And it doesn't have to be this way. So final thing I'll say about that is we also need to um, influence local, municipalities, cities, counties to decriminalize homelessness. Even here in LA, the city of LA, we have something known as Ordinance 4118, sometimes known as the Sit, Lie, Sleep Law, where it basically prevents people from sitting, lying, or sleeping within 500 feet of a park, a school, an underpass, even like a commercial driveway. So it kind of lends you to this idea of like, well, where if you're unhoused and you have nowhere to go and there's not enough shelter beds, you are just in a state of being a criminal by existing in public as a poor person. So we need to influence local municipalities to repeal the criminalization of people experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, in the conversations I've had, there's two things that come up. The first is housing fatigue, or like housing legislative fatigue, which is homelessness and housing insecurity is such a hard problem, and it takes so much time, and they want to see some quicker wins. Elected officials want to see quicker wins, so they move on from the homeless or unhoused situation. And then the affordability question of, okay, how do we afford it? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I think, again, in terms of how do we afford it, we institute a vacancy tax, we institute a wealth tax. There is so much wealth filtering through this city, this county, this state that I think it's a moral crime that we are not using some of this wealth just funneling through our states to actually just make sure people have these very basic dignities of, again, housing, healthcare, education. And again, these are the big points that I bring up when I talk about economic equity. We don't have economic equity if we have people who don't have healthcare, housing, and education. Um, we talk about how California is the fourth largest economy in the world. And that's, compared to the United States and in the history of the world. And so there's just no reason why we actually can't house everybody. As you mentioned, it is a lot of politics. It is a lot of bureaucracy. It is a lot of broken promises. And this is why you can't trust a corporate Democrat who takes money from the real estate industry because that is showing the voters that their interest is with the people who are profiting off of the housing markets rather than the very people who voted them in who require housing just to be able to live a decent life.
Is the real estate industry the only blockade to solving the housing crisis?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's also, um, I would say primarily the real estate industry and like corporates, corporate real estates. Again, I'm not talking about mom and pops. Um, but yeah, I would say other than that, I mean, just sort of a mix of other corporate interests. I mean, uh, a lot of wealthy people have their hands in different markets, and so it's the same reason why we can't have universal health care right now is because our our elected officials are being funded by pharmaceutical industries and hospitals, and again, this is why I think we need to get like big corporate money out of politics altogether. I support overturning Citizens United, but that would probably require a constitutional amendment. So I think there is a world where we the voters just say, "Hey, we're going to stop voting in Democrats or Republicans who are not funded by the people," which is why I also support publicly funded elections.
Hmm. Tell me more about that.
Just this idea that, while I do appreciate that there are funding limits for how much an individual can contribute to a campaign, there's also, a corporation can create a political action committee and essentially unlimitedly fund a candidate. Just as an example, one of my opponents, I'll name her. Her name's Sarah Hernandez, and she's a corporate housing attorney. And what's interesting is her ballot designation is affordable housing advocates. But again, her actual job is she is an attorney and she is for the interests of corporate housing and real estate developers. And if you take a look at who she's funded by, it is so many different corporate real estate developers. But on top of it, they're not just donating money to her campaign, they've actually created an independent expenditure committee for the purpose of promoting her campaign. So I recently received a mailer in my apartment building recently. Well, it's funny, it wasn't addressed to me. I was wondering if maybe they didn't send one to me, but I noticed a bunch of her mailers in the trash in our mailroom. And so, of course, I had to like take a peek. And you take a look at this big, I wish I had it in front of me, but it's like the size of a folder. It's
Mm.
huge. The cost to send these kinds of mailers out is more than my campaign has raised for our entire election cycle. Um, but then if you look at the bottom and you see who is this funded by, and it's funded by the apartment association, the real estate association, and then you take a look at the financial documents on the back end, and you see that they've basically donated over $77,000 in her name to be able to send out this mailer. And so it bothers me because she also co-ops a lot of progressive language and a lot of language that voters like to hear. So, "Oh, I'm progressive. Oh, I'm for affordable housing." And, these are like buzzwords that people like to hear, but you really have to I want the details for people's policies. Otherwise, I'm skeptical as a voter myself. And this is the kind of example that shows you why. You can say one thing, it's not, she can say she's an affordable housing advocate, but when you follow the money usually tells you the real story.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you said, which is, our budget is a moral story. It tells us where our values are, and not only where we're spending our money, but also where we're willing to receive our money as well. It's a commitment to transact with these different interests. And it always boggles my mind that we see these big corporations getting a chance to give so much money And I can understand the helplessness and hopelessness that a everyday average, $20 donor can feel, thinking, well, is my $20 actually going to make a difference? What do you say to somebody who's like, I'm not a big corporation. I don't have unlimited resources. I do want somebody who's truly progressive, who is going to fight for my rights, my quality of life, my social, well-being. But I don't have what these corporations have. How do I get involved?
It's a great question. Firstly, I would say that, that $20 makes a big difference to a campaign like mine. And I'm proud that we are not wasteful with our campaign money. We try to raise enough money to make sure that we can pay for our filing fees, to make sure that we can pay for yard signs and any sort of campaign materials and literature, door hangers and postcards and things like that. So it really does make a big difference for a grassroots candidates. And when it comes down to it, money is not voting. Corporations are not voting. They might be able to, have their corporate influence by donating this money, which is a tool for candidates to be able to, um, you know, for better outreach, for to put out their communications. But it can be done at the grassroots, local, progressive level. And how you do it is by actually being in the community. You do that by knocking on doors. So yeah, I might not be having a mailer go out to all of the doors in my district, but I'm knocking on those doors and I'm trying to actually speak with those voters rather than just paying a fee to put my face in front of them.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was reading, I think it was, Pew Research, maybe it was Gallup that identified the influence of different campaign efforts. They, looked at mailers, they looked at digital ads, they looked at door knocking, they looked at, making speeches, and they found that a one-on-one conversation was the most meaningful thing somebody could do. And so any campaign that I know I'm actively looking at supporting, I am looking at, are you putting your money towards the things that are actually making a difference, not just, spending money to show up, but spending money to have real meaningful conversations and be in the community, having those real meaningful conversations with people, doing that door knocking.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just from the LGBTQ plus perspective. I know we're in California, but being openly trans right now, just nationally, feels really scary. I'm curious how you're overcoming some of the, kind of the vitriolic language that's coming from the right. Are you experiencing any of that on your campaign?
Yeah, absolutely I am. And that's the thing that the voters and the public don't see, is what is being put in front of my eyes as somebody who has the audacity to run as an openly trans queer person, somebody who is a drag performer. Firstly, there are some benefits that come to that. Firstly, I have experience, hosting so many shows. I'm comfortable on the mic. I'm comfortable talking to large groups of people. Comfortable talking to people one on one, comfortable talking to strangers. And there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of speaking opportunities within the queer community. Um, but I think that people are. I'm also kind of struggling a little bit to understand why people are so willing to throw trans people under the bus. And I say that because if they're willing to throw trans people under the bus, they're probably willing to throw you under the bus. We're stronger together, and that should be the point. And that's why, even for me, my whole platform, everything that I do as a community leader, an elected official, I'm always having intersectionality in mind, and just recognizing that the policies that I support and want to support need to support everybody. And, when we talk about queer issues are everyday people issues. Healthcare is a queer issue and it's an everyday people issue. Housing is a queer issue and it's an everyday people issue. Homelessness is a queer issue and it's an everyday people issue. And so, really, just trying to cater to this broader community and let people know that, yeah, you might not be a trans person. I might be the first trans person you've ever openly known to be speaking with. And again, I'm not asking you to vote for me because I'm trans. I'm asking you to vote for me because I recognize what it is like to belong to a marginalized community that has faced historic oppression. And I can look to my left and my right and forward and back and also see these other communities that I might not necessarily belong to, but recognize a similar struggle. And so that's kind of a point that I've been trying to make is, again, this is not about me being a queer person, but it is about bringing queer people into the mix of conversation when it comes to intersectionality and when it also comes to the intersection of class issues.
Yeah. You're a fan favorite of Fox News, Laura Ingraham
Ah,
specifically. I've
yes,
seen some of the clips,
yeah.
and it's so easy to caricaturize somebody. And when I look at some of the things that you've said publicly, some of the things you've posted online, I see somebody that has lived experience on what it means to be a marginalized person and can speak for the other for all marginalized people, all minority people, whether you are trans or not. Whether you even attend drag performances or not, whether you are part of the LGBTQ plus community or not, you when you have somebody in office who has that lived experience, not only are they going to speak up for the communities that they're a part of, but communities that have similar experiences. And I think that leads me to your campaign slogan, which is "Keep Fascism Out of California." Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing and what you've seen when it comes to ICE, immigration, enforcement, border security, and what led you to use that as kind of the go-to platform for you?
Yeah, I've had a lot of people comment on my slogan, which again is "Keep fascism out of California," and I hate that that even has to be my slogan, but I felt like it was sort of a unifying slogan because I don't know of anybody who wants fascism in California. I've certainly had some people criticize it and say, "Oh, well, who are you talking about?" And I am referencing federal encroachment on California, and to me, it's so ironic because I feel like the Republican Party and conservatives have historically always been about state rights, but when it's applicable to the values and ideas that they agree with. Um, and so, it has been really troubling to see again, the encroachment of federal authorities here in California for a variety of issues. We've been seeing CBP and ICE coming into our communities under the guise of making our communities safer, but they're actually doing the opposite. They are creating tension and fear and an unknowing in our communities that we are seeing not just on the individual level, but also on economic levels. If you take a look and just see, how many fewer immigrants are out on the streets with like food carts and even I don't know if anyone's familiar with Santee Alley, which is it's down in downtown LA. It's this it was this big, beautiful, robust area of all of these individualized shops. And when I went most recently, it was a ghost town because people are afraid of being kidnapped by ICE. I will say that abolishing ICE has been something that I've been promoting since 2019. When I first
Right.
ran for U.S. Congress in 2020, that was something that I was saying back then was abolish ICE. And I will say back then, I actually was getting pushback from Democrats, from people who, consider themselves to be, center left or a little bit more leftist. That was something that they were kind of struggling to get on board with. Well, fast forward 7 years, and now this is actually an idea that's coming into the mainstream. So I think that a lot of actual leftists, a lot of actual progressives are ahead of the curve when it comes to ideas and policies that are going to benefit everybody and make sure that nobody's left behind and make sure that nobody is treated unfairly. And it has been heartbreaking to see it happen here in the city of LA. The first major ICE raid happened in June of 2025, so almost a year ago. I was actually at City Hall that day. I was accepting an award from City Council District 13. I was named the Pride Honoree for 2025 for City 13, which was really cool. So I show up to City Hall and I'm in like full glam. I've got like I'm got my makeup on, I'm wearing this beautiful dress, and it was a wonderful ceremony. And just getting to be able to speak about queer issues at City Hall was a really wonderful moment. Well, as soon as we left City Hall, I ended up getting a message on, I think, like Instagram or something from another activist saying, "Yo, there's ice raids happening in the Pinata district. If you can head over there and check it out, please do so. And we happen to be just a few blocks away. So me and my campaign manager went to the Pinata district and were there to witness one of the first like major ICE raids in our community. And just seeing the way that they treat our neighbors like they are animals and like they're not even living beings, like they're just trash. It was so disappointing. Um, and I don't think that anybody really wants to live in a highly militarized world. And yet here I am having my neighbors afraid of being taken away by ICE, and you've got these what are essentially tanks rolling down the streets. You've got these masked agents who are basically just coming in to say, "We're in control, we're in charge, we're taking these people away. This is for your safety." And it doesn't make sense to me. I ended up getting tear gassed that day, and I'm like running away in sparkly heels. And so this was just like it was a really wild experience for me, just to be able to experience that firsthand. Um, and it hasn't just been these like mass raids. It's also been these individual raids of longtime community members. One of our community members, his name is Raphael. He lived just a few blocks away from me here in Silver Lake. He'd been a longtime resident, over 30 years. And all of his neighbors vouched for him as like just a great neighbor, somebody who was always looking out for fellow neighbors. And then this video comes online of these again these masked agents just going in and dragging him out of the house that he's lived in for 30 years, dragging him out of his neighborhood as if they had the right to be there more than he did. And it's just really infuriating. And so, when we talk about abolishing ICE, obviously I recognize that's something that can't be officially and formally done, from a state level government, but we can actually take measures to keep federal agents at bay and to really limit their power here in the state of California. And a lot of that actually deals with abiding by state laws that have been passed by the California state legislature. In early January of this year, the state legislature passed a law that the intention was to ban ICE agents from being masked whenever they were engaging in their official duties. And yet you look at this video of my neighbor Raphael being taken away, and these people are covered in masks. They don't present any sort of identification. And it also lends to this idea of people don't even know if this is really an actual ICE agent. This just could be some white supremacist who wants to get in on the action of harming marginalized communities. And so all of this is creating sort of this sense of fear that doesn't actually need to exist.
Yeah. What would the plan be? So you get elected, and is it the enforcement of existing laws, or is it also introduction of new legislation that gets that restricts the power of ICE agents?
Yeah, it's definitely column A and column B. Um, it's the enforcement of existing laws, the creation of new laws, and the enforcement of those laws. And who's going to enforce those laws? It is going to be law enforcement. If we are spending billions and billions of dollars on LASD and LAPD, then they sure as hell better actually abide by those laws themselves and prevent federal agents from creating a sense of tyranny here in our communities and in our states. And I would be willing to go as far as saying that local municipalities and state level police, if they don't abide by those laws, should be defunded. I mean, I actually think they should be defunded either way, but I think there should be a legal basis for preventing them from further funding if they are not abiding by laws or enforcing the laws that they were hired to do.
There was um, a recent poll that said 52% of Americans say the Trump administration is doing too much on deportation, and strong majorities oppose immigration arrests at churches, schools, hospitals. For most of the country, these are polling numbers, but for SD 26, Boyle Heights, Koreatown, Lincoln Heights, these are in your district.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from people there right now about what this is doing to their daily life?
Absolutely. I've talked to so many neighbors who are scared. I've also not talked to so many neighbors in the sense of something I wanted to mention is as we've been doing door knocking, we've actually been noticing less people answer their doors. And I think they are nervous to even answer the door when a stranger is just showing up, knocking on the front door. But there's absolutely this just a pervasive fear across our communities that one or any of our neighbors could just be snatched up at any given time. And I think a lot of, how we combat that is through community, is by looking out for each other, is by creating neighborhood systems of empowerment. I work for a neighborhood homeless coalition as a program manager, and we have even had fears of ICE showing up at one of our programs. And so the way that we have combated you know this potentially happening is even by creating volunteer watch patrols in the neighborhoods to make sure that ICE isn't just going to show up and snatch somebody away. It's providing resources like red cards and making sure that everybody knows their rights. Providing whistles, to sort of sound the alarm if ICE does end up showing up in our communities. But yeah, overall, this is a heavily immigrant community district, and a lot of my neighbors are scared right now, and I want to ensure them that they are going to have a representative who is going to stand up for their rights and to make
Yeah.
sure that they are not snatched.
Yeah, I want to go back to, you mentioned defunding the police, which was caught national headlines during the George Floyd protests,
Mhm.
um, and the Democratic establishment was really resistant to that language or even that as policy or any type of legislation. What does that look like? So when we defund the police, what I think about is being able to then fund other things that are much more effective at preventing crime. For example, social workers, therapy, et cetera, mental health practitioners, expanded mental health practices, et cetera. What for you? What does defunding the police look like? What does enforcement look like when that's taken place? Break that down a little bit.
Yeah, so I think firstly, enforcement of that is going to be up to the very legislatures that pass motions to defund. As you mentioned, this was such a huge point of conversation back in 2020, and I was excited for the idea of this actually coming to fruition. Like it felt like there was this moment happening where we actually can defund police, and it's not about like punishing these people. It's about taking away, it's about not pouring all of our resources into policing. I myself am an abolitionist, but when it comes down to it, the money that like
What do you mean by that?
I do believe there's a world where we can exist without private prisons and without without police forces. I do really believe that community can take care of community. Of course, there's always going to be some outliers, but in general, I don't think most people are walking down the street wanting to harm others. And by creating an overly policed state, it puts this fear into people that there is some sort of danger that they're supposed to be avoiding. Ultimately, after 2020, City of LA did end up defunding the police by I want to say about $150 million, which is a lot of money. But when you compare it to the multi-billion-dollar budget they have, it is actually just a dent. And then in preceding years, they ended up funding them more than that original amount that was actually defunded. So it's actually a big myth when people say that democratic cities and states have defunded police. They actually have not. It may have been a temporary measure and a very just small temporary measure at that. But at this point, all police forces are fully and excessively funded across municipalities, counties, and states. This is something that came up in conversation last night. As I was mentioning earlier, we had this discussion at the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council about um, one of our co-chairs wanted to put forth a motion to increase LAPD foot patrols in our neighborhoods. While at the same time, we were also having conversations last night about things like street lighting. And that's how you actually can create a better sense of safety and actually prevent crime is by making sure that all of our city services, all of our county services, our state services are fully funded. Right now, the wait time in LA, the city of LA, to have a street light fixed is like it's about 9 to 12 months. And yet here we are saying, oh, we want to just give more money to police. Well, why don't we actually just fix the street lights, and that creates a safer environment. So you do a lot of these other smaller things within bureaucratic structure that actually do end up preventing crime versus overfunding a singular department and relying on them falsely to prevent crime. Because again, police don't really prevent crime. They also are not even particularly good at solving crime. I think that they are generally a deterrent if they are around, but I don't want to exist in a city where there's a million cops. That doesn't make me safe. I don't feel safe when I'm around somebody with a gun, whether or not they are a police person.
Yeah, we've kind of talked around all of these different issues from affordability to policing to budget to housing to healthcare. I'm curious when somebody says, "Okay, why you? Why should we elect you?" What has been your response?
Oh, how much longer do we have? No, I'm kidding. I will say I'm really proud of where I am at in terms of being a community advocate, a locally elected representative. I've busted my ass over the past almost decade serving my community, and I'm asking for the community to advance me to a legislative position. And so, earlier we were discussing this idea of viability, and one of the things that has been distressing to me is okay, on the one hand, obviously Republicans, especially alt-right Republicans, people who are very conservative, they're never going to vote for me for a myriad of reasons. Because I'm a trans person, a queer person, a drag performer, they consider my policies to be, I'm like a lunatic leftist in their minds. Those are the people whose minds I'm never going to be able to change. But it is disappointing to see questions of viability when it comes to the left. And even, I was disappointed. Well, let me say, I have received a number of amazing endorsements from local community organizations like La Defensa, Black Los Angeles Young Democrats, the California Faculty Association. I will say, though, I was disappointed that I did not receive the recommendation for the DSA LA voter guide. And what's interesting is I was the recommended candidate for the DSLA guide back in 2020 and in 2022. And what happened in those years was I did well because I had the support of progressive organizations. In this particular guide, they described me as a perennial candidate, and I was bothered by that because I don't know, it just sort of
What
places
do
me
they
in the
mean by that?
uh, I would like to know, but what I think they mean by that is I'm a candidate who just continues to run. And there are candidates who, you'll always see them on the ballots, but they're not actually out there doing the work. Why they want to continue to run, I'm not quite sure. But for me, I can tell you the reason this is my fourth big election that I've been running for, just as a little electoral history for me. So when I ran for Congress in 2020, I was still kind of a relatively unknown figure in politics. I was known locally in my community. I was on the Silver Lake Neighborhood Council. But I ended up coming in third place out of 8 candidates that year, and I lost the second place spot by less than 1%. So I was, an inch away from advancing to the general election. And mind you, this was against a Democrat, very well known, very well funded corporate Democrat, Adam Schiff, who at the time was very beloved by the Democratic Party because he was deeply involved in the Trump impeachment and the Mueller reports. And I got a lot of pushback for challenging a Democrat. Firstly, I do want to say that I think it's extremely democratic to challenge somebody within your own party because it actually gives the voters a choice. Do you want somebody who is more moderate, more centrist, or do you want somebody who is more progressive leftist? Very few things in life are black and white, this or that. That's why the duopoly is kind of crap, in my opinion. Anyways, so after coming that close in 2020, I said, I have to try this again. And so in 2022, we tried again. There was an even bigger pool of candidates, and I ended up coming in second place out of 9 candidates. I advanced to the general election. It was the first time that an openly trans non binary person had ever advanced to a seat for US Congress. And, I'm trying to break these, pink ceilings, if you will. And we ended up receiving over 60,000 votes that year and I didn't win. And I wasn't really planning on trying again. It was like, oh, I made it to the general election. It didn't happen. Well, in 2024, the incumbent who had by that point been in office for over 20 years ever since I think he was the representative for this district starting when I was a sophomore in high school. I'm turning 40 this summer. And and so when he announced that he was not seeking reelection for U.S. Congress, that or for the U.S. House of Representatives, and instead was running for U.S. Senate, I said I have to try this one more time. And so I put my hat in the ring, and it was an even more crowded race this time. We had 15 people running for this seat. It was the most crowded congressional primary in the whole state of California, out of 50 plus districts. And unfortunately, because the establishment Democrat was stepping out of the scene, you had all of these other establishment people who sort of crawled out from under their rocks and decided to run because they would never necessarily challenge, somebody who was already in office. So they're basically coming
Mm,
in and saying, "Oh, let me come. Now's the opportunity." Meanwhile, I've been doing the work and trying to institute these big changes for my community, not just when it's convenient for the party. Finally, ended up coming, I think I was one of only 5 candidates that broke 10%. Ultimately did not win, but I didn't lose by that much. And I wasn't really gonna run again, but in this particular race that I'm running for, California State Senate District 26, our current representative, her name's Maria Elena Durazo. She's a longtime labor advocate, advocate for civil and human rights. I would never challenge her because I appreciate her representation. But when I found out that she was running for LA County Board of Supervisors, I said, let's go ahead and do this. Now, what the point that I'm trying to make out of this is I have run with intention every single time I've run and with a strategy. And I do consider myself the kind of candidate that can win, but we also need support. And to have progressive organizations like DSA LA dismiss me as a perennial candidate is disappointing. They even in their guide spoke about me saying that I have the most progressive platform in the district and arguably the state. And yet they ended up giving the recommendation to one of the other candidates in my race, who I actually do like. She is also progressive, but she is politically a newcomer. She's never had any sort of elected office. And so, meanwhile, yeah, I'm in a very local office, but I've been an elected official serving my community for the past 8 years. And that's the same voting bloc that is going to vote for me for state senates.
yeah. I mean, what did you learn about yourself through that? Like that sounds like it takes a lot of endurance and a lot of stamina to continue to run, to continue to expand that, to continue to expand the visibility for LGBTQ plus people, but also to continue to show up and say, I have a reason to show up. I have a reason to run. I deserve to be in the room. What did you learn about yourself in that process?
I learned that I am a resilient person, that I am somebody who has the endurance to keep going, even in the face of criticism from people within my party, from without my party. And the important thing is that I realize that how important community is to me. And I don't do this for myself. I do this for my community. When I say community, I mean the communities that I belong to, such as the LGBTQIA plus community, the renter community, the working class community. I also mean my geopolitical, physical community. And I have what it takes to be able to actually do this. And but we also need the supports. And I think that sometimes people are afraid to back a candidate if they fear that if I vote for this person, there's a chance that we're going to end up having somebody worse in place. And I think we're actually seeing a lot of that with the LA mayoral race. I think we're seeing that with the California governor's race, where
Yeah.
with it being a top two election, a jungle primary, there is a chance where there could be two Republican candidates that advance to the general election for California governor. So I think that with the governor's race, people are actually being a little more conservative than they might actually truly be, only
Yeah.
because the candidate that they really want, they don't consider them to be a viable candidate. We're seeing the same thing at the LA mayor's race level. But with my particular race, we have 6 Democrats that are running, and we have 2 Republicans that are running. The 2 Republicans, I couldn't tell you anything about them. They're not really actively involved community members. And then when you look at the pool of Democratic candidates, you again kind of have the spectrum of centrist, moderate corporates, and then there's one or two candidates that are actually leftists. So again, for me, I just kind of realized that yes, I'm a resilient person and community matters to me. And I want to be able to stand up and serve my community in any way possible. And I believe the best way that I can serve my community is at the legislative level. I like to describe my political philosophy as a trickle up philosophy, trickle up politics. You know, we've heard of trickle down politics from the Reagan era, where you take care of everybody at the top, these corporations, you'll see the impacts trickle down. Well, I think judging where we're at 40 years later, we've seen that it's actually quite the opposite. You take care of the people at the top, and the people at the top take care of the people at the top. My philosophy is we take care of our communities, our neighbors, and you will see the cultural and economic impacts of that trickle up. And again, we can take care of everybody if we take care of everybody.
Yeah, I've never understood the trickle down economic kind of messaging or like positioning. I don't want breadcrumbs.
Me
I
neither.
don't want like to hope and wait for my government to represent and take care of the needs that we have as a people. And then I also know like I would assume it's in the best interest of these billion-dollar corporations to have an educated society, to have a safe society, to have good roads so that that society and those residents can get to their jobs, to have a society that is mentally healthy, to have a society that's physically healthy. So it I am always I'm always so shocked that these corporations aren't supporting social welfare programs that would give them like a stronger labor force, a stronger, a stronger pool of people to hire. And I'm curious your perspective on that.
I think my perspective on that is yes, what you said makes sense. It makes sense, like from a moral, intellectual level. You take care of, you would think that corporations and people higher up would want to, take care of everybody down below. But I think the reality of it is that they actually want a populace that is slightly unhealthy, slightly poor, and so that they are so distracted by meeting their needs that they don't actually rebel and demand more.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I tend to be an optimist. I would think like, wouldn't you want that? But I can see that it's an easier population to control. It's an easier population to do what you want at the top. And so I think that's why we need people like you in office to be able to fight back against those corporate agendas and that corporate greed. I mean, I think when people talk about capitalism is the best economic system, I think it's okay, but every single problem you're seeing right now is under a capitalistic society. And so it clearly isn't solving all of our problems, and there's clearly a need for something else to be at play here.
Totally. You are so right about that. I mean, it's so funny. And you often see this from the right, people calling anybody who is a Democrat a commie or a socialist. I mean, eh, eh, all of the major candidates that are running for LA mayor, or I shouldn't say all, but most, and most that are running for governor, you've got the right calling them commies and socialists. I wish they were commies and socialists, and unfortunately, they're not. They are actually all capitalists. They're corporatists, and it's unfortunate that the very few areas where we actually see bipartisan governance is in areas that do not benefit the people. They are areas of war, areas of police, areas of big money.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about California politics. Is there anybody who's running in the mayoral race that you have endorsed or supporting?
I am not endorsing anybody in the primary, but I am happy to announce that I'm going to be voting for Ray Wong in the primary election. I think Ray is incredible. I do believe that Ray has some major socialist tendencies. And again, that's like this big, scary word, socialist.
I love how excited you are to vote for somebody with socialist tendencies, to say she has these socialist tendencies and that's why I'm voting for her and not why I'm scared of this socialist boogeyman.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to me, but I think this also is why we need universal education. Is because people confuse political systems with economic systems, and you'll have these people on the right who will point to these authoritarian socialist governments. And the reason they didn't work is because they were authoritarian, not because they were socialist. And we think about
Hmm.
here in America, it's in some ways, I guess, a democracy, but under capitalism. So capitalism is our economic system. Democracy or republic is our political system, which is why I identify as a democratic socialist. I think that socialism has these wonderful values and benefits for everybody if they are democratically instituted, which means people get to collectively decide, do we want to give people healthcare, housing, and education? I think, again, yeah, people like point to these authoritarian socialist structures and will tell you socialism doesn't work, has never worked, doesn't work anywhere. But you take a look at the Netherlands, and they've got a much higher life expectancy, a much higher quality of life, happiness, health, pretty much everything. America thinks that it's this American propaganda of we're number one, we're number one. It's like, yeah, number one in some not very
How?
good things. Um, gun violence,
Yeah. Gun violence, people
imperialism.
in prison,
Yep, yep,
people who can't afford to pay their rent or their buy a house. Yeah.
exactly.
Interesting. Okay, and then what about for governor, California governor? Is there anybody you're voting for in this primary?
Ugh, it's I'm kind of stuck. I will tell you this. I'm not thrilled by any of the Democratic contenders. I couldn't even tell you all the number of people that are running for governor because I think it's like 40 or 41. It's literally an entire page of the ballots. But when it comes down to maybe the top like 7 or 8 candidates who are polling the highest, I have criticisms for all of them.
Two or three that I've looked at so far. Obviously there's with Swalwell's absence, the
Mhm. Yep.
three that I feel like have risen are Tom Steyer, Xavier Becerra, and Katie Porter.
Yep.
I loved Katie Porter in Congress, at least the things that I saw. I'm not very familiar with all of her positions. I see there's a lot of love, especially on Threads, where I spend a lot of my time, for Becerra. And then Tom Steyer's, a billionaire, and just morally and ethically, I don't think I could ever vote for a billionaire. So
Yeah.
I'm curious of those three, what your thoughts are.
Yep, and those are the exact same 3 that I was thinking are sort of the headliners for, I don't wanna say the left, I'll say for the Democratic Party, left
Mm,
overall. You've got, Butch Ware, who's running for the Green Party. Um, Unfortunately, Butch Ware was prevented from making it onto the ballots, so he is a write-in candidate, and so when it comes to the 3 Democrats that are polling highest, I have major issues with all of them, and that's, I think, why everybody is so stuck. There isn't really a standout Mamdani on a governor level.
yeah.
When it comes to Becerra, he feels like the safe choice. He feels like the one with, yes, the most experience. I'm certain that he would know how to easily navigate the actual technical role of being governor. But when it comes down to it, our values don't necessarily align. I don't think he's going to allow universal health care to come to California. And as a candidate who is running to be in the state Senate to actually bring universal health care, how can I
Yeah.
vote for a candidate who I know is going to end up vetoing health care if it ends up making it to his desk? And
Mm,
then we've got Tom Steyer, who has interestingly been endorsed by a number of historically progressive organizations, but I'm in the same boat as you. I don't think I can ethically vote for a billionaire. I have this idea of like, well, if you have all this money, why not use your money to help the public? It just in some ways feels like a power grab. But at the same time, he is saying the right things. Like he's saying a lot of policies that I support, like universal health care and some other issues. He is trans inclusive in his language, but there is something that is ultimately I just can't trust about a billionaire. I mean, there are no ethical billionaires.
yeah.
And then Katie Porter, I think that she is. I've sort of had a roller coaster perception over her, over the past several years, from when she was in Congress to when she ran for U.S. Senate here in California and now governor. I don't think it's a good thing that she did not do well in the U.S. Senator race very recently, and now she's going for, again, another statewide position. I don't think she's polling as high as the other two candidates. So it does kind of feel like it's between Becerra and Steyer. And again, for me, it's this moral dilemma of, do I vote for the seemingly quieter and safer choice who is not going to actually advance policies that I believe in? Or do I vote for the billionaire who is saying the right things, but how can I actually trust a billionaire?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. And
disappointing.
I think you've articulated what I've felt around it as well. Of like, Becerra seems safe, a- and maybe has like a lot of the. I think he's polling at number one right now. So he seems safe. I definitely don't want a Republican, so I got to support
Yep.
somebody who can win.
Yep.
But then I like Steyer's positions. You know, I'm not very sure about being able to vote for a billionaire, especially a billionaire who made his money from for-profit prisons.
Thank you. Thank
Like
you. Thank
like
you.
things that are ethically clearly wrong. So yeah, I feel you on that. Interesting. Is there any other race that you're like really excited about right now?
Gosh, I think those are kind of the big ones. Obviously, my race. And then, yeah, the mayor's race and the governor's races, I think, are the big ones that Angelinos are paying attention to right now. But also, there's also a lot of important local races happening. We've got elections for city council and for, judicial positions and school board. And, it's interesting how I've had this conversation with my campaign manager, Chloe, a lot about how there seems to be this overemphasis on the most local positions and then the highest positions. And the ones in the middle kind of get lost in the shuffle. So obviously, you are paying attention to who's going to be your mayor and your city council member. Obviously, you're going to be paying attention to who's going to be your governor. But it's for some reason there's not a big emphasis on who's going to be your state assembly member or your state senator, when those are actually the people creating the state laws that govern the city that you exist in. And so, but at the same time, with there being dozens of races overall, it is kind of hard to keep track of you know being able to name every single person you want to vote for without some sort of candidate guide or doing
Yeah.
intense research on the candidates. So
Yeah.
so I that's been part of our journey as a candidate for state senate, is just sort of relaying and expressing the importance of these kinds of positions and how they impact policies at the local level.
Yeah. Um, so maybe I'm going to give you one last scenario. You get invited to be on Fox News. What do you say? Laura Ingraham and their pundits have said some really nasty things about you.
Mhm.
What do you say to them? But then also, what do you say to their audience?
Great question. So, um, firstly, I want to say, we talked earlier about how the conversations that I've had with voters have been really wonderful conversations. These are real world conversations that I'm having with people. Any of the vitriol, any of the pushback, any of the transphobia, homophobia that I've experienced through my campaign has all been in the online world. It's been these people who probably don't even live in the districts, let alone the states. And I think that there is just this big sensational factor when it comes to Fox News. I actually was invited to do an interview on Fox News Local 11 last week, and they've been interviewing candidates, and they have actually been respectable respectable interviews. I was treated humanely. I was not misgendered. The next day, after I was on Fox News Local, I got a text message from Fox National saying, "Hey, I'm from Fox News National. Do we have your permission to use your campaign video for a segment?" And the reason I agreed to this is because I think it is important to have that kind of exposure as a candidate. Again, I go into these things knowing that I'm not going to have nice things said about me, but at the same time, having an anti endorsement from Fox News should tell you all the things you want to know about me being a candidate. So I have no problem I hope Laura Ingraham invites me to be on her show. I will tell her to her face that the people actually want universal health care, housing, education, queer inclusion, and that these are not, as she said, certifiably insane positions.
Yeah, I I fi- I think the first thing I thought when I saw the first news article was, "Oh, Fox News doesn't like Maebe. I'm voting for Maebe."
Exactly, exactly.
So
It's a
I love
weird anti-endorsement that I will accept.
so good. I feel like you should have a slogan that says "Fox News doesn't like me. That's why you should vote
Oh,
for me."
I love that. I love that.
Well, maybe thank you so much for being on the show. How do people get to know a little bit more about you, or donate, or like spend time with you? What's the next thing you want people to do?
Yeah, so we are obviously grassroots progressive candidate, not taking any corporate funding. We do need donations. We need people. We need volunteers to help us door knock and to write postcards and to talk to their neighbors. A lot of it is just word of mouth. Just talk to your friends and neighbors about who you're voting for and let them know that you're voting for Maebe for state senate because she's the most progressive leftist in this race. If anybody is not listening locally and want to learn more about my campaign or support or follow, you can find me on Instagram at Maebe A Girl. That's MaebeAGirl. Or you can visit my website, which is maybeforstatesenate.com.
Which, by the way, I love Maybe a Girl. It's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. And kind of
So
the
good.
perfect name for a non binary person. That's my stage
It's
name. So
awesome.
I go by
It's
Maybe in my everyday life, but Maybe a Girl is my stage name. And it makes sense for a non binary person.
100%. It's like the perfect name. So beautiful. Well, thank you again, maybe, for being on the show. For those of you who are listening, thank you so much for spending time with us. Make sure you like and subscribe and visit Maybe's website. Donate, spend some time. If you're looking for a leftist progressive who is walking the talk and talking the walk and doing the work of helping the community directly, vote for Maebe. Thank you so
And
much,
who's
Maebe.
and who's also viable.
And who's also viable.
Thank you,
I love it.
Shawn. I had a great
Thank
time
you, Maeve.
chatting with you. Thanks, everyone.
As you know, I'm on a mission to expand what it means to be LGBTQ plus in leadership positions. One way you can help is by subscribing to this channel. By subscribing, you make our content more visible and get it in front of the right people. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Proud to lead.
Proud to Lead is produced by Next Step Social and Podcasting. Thank you to everyone who made this episode possible. For more information, visit nextstepsocial.com/proudtolead.